Today's topic is, well, at least from my side, about why Fuse. From your side, it's more about probably why cross-platform at all in the first place. However, my personal experience is mostly with Fuse. It's very limited with the other tools, so I will do my best to give my impressions and my knowledge about what Fuse is and why you should choose Fuse maybe over other tools. So the first reason why is because Fuse has stickers, right? So I know you have them too. Now let's get to the work. Now when you think about cross-platform development, there's quite a bunch of things to consider when you are looking at the landscape lately. Now at the one end of the spectrum there's the native tools like Xcode and Android Studio. Then at the very other end there's the hybrid HTML5 mobile applications, HTML, CSS stuff being compiled into applications, and then we have PhoneGap and Sencha and stuff like that. Now then there are a few guys who are trying to bridge the gap towards one or the other end, and then we have Xamarin, and then we also have this accelerator Titanium, which is quite a long-term player but hasn't picked up for some reason. And now then right in the middle we have the cross-platform tools that spit out native applications, but they still provide proper cross-platform development functionality. Now, and that is mostly the part that I will be focusing on today when I show you my comparison, how Fuse compares to mostly React Native and Native Script, because that's what Fuse usually gets compared to. When you think about Fuse, how it compares to the others, it's important that you understand the philosophy behind Fuse, because that's what really sets it apart. And the philosophy is summarized in basically 4 major points. The first one is that Fuse is made for both designers and developers, which is not the case with the others. I will get back to that point a bit later when I tell you more about UX markup and why it's also for designers. Now, Fuse also brings new, better workflows in that the same sense that you have designers and developers working together, not just one being somewhere, in Sketch or Photoshop and a developer doing some JavaScript coding or, native coding, but instead they can actually come together and work on the same code base. So that's new and better workflows for an organization and also actually for people. Now the next point is Fuse strives to provide flexibility. The thinking is that whatever comes to your mind, that what it is that you want to build, you should be able to. And you should not be limited by, some, limitations of the framework that you are working with. If you have in mind a fancy animation, you can go ahead and build it. If you have in mind native components, again, you can go ahead and build it. So it's all about flexibility. And the fourth one is it focuses on user experience. Now, one thing is about how you work with Fuse, and also I will tell you more about that later, but also what comes out of Fuse, the applications, the thinking behind Fuse is that they should simply feel better on your hands than those produced with other tools. So those are the points behind the philosophy of Fuse. So I have you in the right mindset about what I'm going to tell you next. Now, when you look at all the cross-platform frameworks, there's something they share, obviously. Now, one thing is they all run JavaScript in a virtual machine, obviously. They also access platform APIs and UI components in one way or another, because they have to render the native applications, so they have to have access to that. They also offer a level of cross-platform abstractions as well as direct access to native user interfaces to those platforms, right? So that you know when your application should know whether it's running on an iPhone or it's running on Android, so you can, you know, act accordingly. For example, iOS does not have a hardware back button, well, when Android does, so you definitely have to think about that and provide a, you know, basically correct user experience on that platform, so you have to have access to that. And also all of those tools, mostly those three that I'm comparing today, they provide a markup for building user interfaces. Now the markup is basically just an XML type of thing that you use to define how the application will look like, the building blocks. Now that is on the surface. If you look a bit deeper below what's under there, then the picture is quite different, and that's where I'm going. First one, JavaScript and threading. So that was the first point that all the cross-platform tools share, right? Now in Fuse it's done a bit differently. NativeScript and React Native, they were built with the JavaScript requirement as the starting point. You have to write in JavaScript, and then they filled in the rest. With Fuse, it's not the case. Fuse started out with the native platform APIs, and then filled in with JavaScript as the language to write business logic in, simply because JavaScript is easy to learn, easy to adapt, and easy to write. Now, the markup, the actual application user interface that you write in Fuse, it compiles to native code. It's first translated into C++ and then compiled using Android Studio or Xcode to native code. And when that lands on your phone, it's actually a native user interface, being super fast. And also the JavaScript business logic lands on the phone. However, when the app runs, the user interface and the JavaScript, they run on separate threads. And that is important because, maybe you know the answer, if not, simply that means that business logic, whatever, you know, work it might be doing, it will not interfere with the user interface, and it will be always smooth, fast, there will be no frame drops or anything. So, and how is that better? In a simple one word, it's performance. All of those points summarize into performance. So JavaScript virtual machines versus compiled native code. It's true, JavaScript virtual machines have become fast. They are super fast. For example, I don't know, Facebook application, I have never experienced a lag in that one. It's fast, right? However, it can never be faster than compiled native code, right? So when you want to have a super fancy animation where you have a lot of text or big images or something, then nothing can beat compiled native code. Now, also, when you get this multi-threading going on the device, it means that you can build cooler stuff and you can make it run fine on lower-end devices, like really old, slow Android phones, I don't know, iPhone 4. I am actually testing my apps that I'm building at home on an iPhone 4S, and they are working fine with Fuse. Now, and all of that, still, the user interface will be running at 60 frames per second and completely detached from the business logic. It will not be waiting for your business logic to perform some kind of a task just to animate to another page or scroll up or down or something. So, how do others handle this? I will actually need to leave this hanging here. Now, as far as I know, NativeScript runs on a single thread. And there's a really good point why they do that, because they provide access to all low-level native APIs in JavaScript. So that kind of makes sense. You run on a single thread, and then you don't have to have any interrupt code to actually access those low-level APIs. They are just there. You can use them. However, that means that your performance will be degraded significantly. It's not exactly the same case with NativeScript, because NativeScript employs some sort of multi-threading, but still React Native, right? React Native does rely a lot on JavaScript. Also in relation to UI. It's a bit better, it's not as good as NativeScript. And now there's a funny thing about NativeScript that I think it was 2 days ago when I read a post from their CEO or something where they are actually thinking about adding multi-threading support to NativeScript. So I would think that Fuse is one step ahead. Now, UX markup. This is probably the point where Fuse stands out from the crowd, above the crowd, like way above it, because Fuse is for everyone, for anyone. Now, this is the UX markup that you actually write in a Fuse application. So this is a hello world application, right? App starts, app ends, and then you have this text that says hello world. Here's a bit more complicated example with a rectangle that is that wide and that high. It has some sort of a nice bluish color, and then you can also write all the user interaction. When you tap an element, there is a UX element for that. Tapped, there's clicked, there's a lot of these triggers. And then also when this rectangle is tapped, which is just a tap, then it will scale to 0.8 of its size over a duration of 0.3 seconds with a specific easing, and it will also move to the right relative to its size. So that's how you write UX markup in Fuse, and I think it's just a beautiful language. Now, the point that I raised before, that Fuse is for both designers and developers, is basically rooted in this fact that I think the language is so easy to learn to anyone understanding a little bit of English that any designer can just sit down, learn this UX markup, and start building actual applications. Not just working on designs and thinking about how some animation should work, but actually see how it works and tweak it accordingly. So that's for designers. Now you might be thinking, how does this help a developer? Well, think about that way. You just spend virtually no time building this, and then you can get to working, to actually implementing the business logic, right? So that's kind of cool. That's a win-win situation to me. Now, take a look at this hello world application. That is actual code. You don't need to write anything else to get that application working in Fuse. And now let me show you the next screen. Can anyone guess which framework we are referring to? Now my question is, really, seriously, are the 90s back? Okay, that's fine. My main concern with this is that I need to know a lot of imports from packages, and then I need to create a class, and then I have to suddenly return XML from a JavaScript code without any quotes or anything. That just seems weird to me, but as I said initially, I do not have a lot of experience with these other tools, but my thinking is, when I see this, and when I see that, then this is the way I'm going to go, definitely, hands down. Now, the next point is this OpenGL UI that Fuse has. A lot of fuss is being told about, the native looks of applications. When you have an app, developed strictly natively for Android, then you have the Android guidelines and whatnot. The same for iOS. You have to build a proper iOS application with the native controls and gestures and everything else. Now, my personal preference and experience is that it's not entirely true. If you can create a nice looking user interface, then you can make it work looking the same on both platforms. However, that said, Fuse actually still supports blending those two things. You can have both native elements on screen alongside or on top or below these OpenGL components. So you can actually make specific looking application on iOS and on Android, but still work on the same code base. So that's pretty cool. With React Native and native script, mostly what you are left with, it's the native platform controls, and that's perfectly fine. I mean, it's nice to have a cross-platform solution that just allows you to write once and, you know, run everywhere. However, it will look different. It's not the case with Fuse. And with Fuse, you also get the animations working exactly the same across the platforms, down to keyframes, down to easings, down to every minor detail at 60 frames per second. Go wild with it. So that's the major takeaway for Fuse and this OpenGL UI. Now, this one is actually taken from the community. I am personally myself very active on Fuse community, trying to help newbies get started with UX markup, learn the language, and actually do something useful. And this guy, Cubissimo, he speaks Portuguese and he's from Brazil. He started on Fuse about 2 months ago, I think. And the guy definitely has some previous experience with the React Native and the like. So he's definitely a coder type of guy. And this is what he wrote. 4 to 6 hours to build this app. And that's an actual screenshot that I took today. It was, I don't know what was the date, but I could look it up in the community. And actually you can go on the community and try to find this entry. And you will find it. And there he has supplied a video, 38 seconds, showing an actually recorded application flow on an iOS device. So you who have seen iOS screens recorded, you know that this means that it's recorded on device. So now I would actually like to show you what the application looks like and does. Yeah, that is basically it. Now in 38 seconds, and the guy said it was 4 to 6 hours of work. If that's not cool, then I don't know what is. And I mean, that's not me, that's someone else who just basically started with Fuse. Now you get all the, you know, scrolling animations, things getting bigger, smaller. Then you have the material transitions where things pop out and nowhere. Then you have the horizontal scrollers inside of vertical scrollers, and so on. This card design with overlapping cards at the screen, right? I honestly can't imagine how much work that would take in, you know, native tools. I imagine that's not 4 to 6 hours, but more like 4 to 6 days, probably. And the next point about this is there's probably little to none JavaScript involved. That's another major takeaway, right? Now, let's move on. Visual and design tools. Since Fuse has this UX markup language, which is basically just XML, as you saw before with the rectangle example, that means that you can build a lot of stuff on top of that generates this XML. You can create what you see is what you get tools on top of that UX markup language. And actually Fuse has been working on that, and they still are. Now Fuse has a sketch importer, so basically you can just drag and drop a sketch file onto Fuse and it will extract the assets and build your application interface for you. So that's a nice start. Now, just as the other tools, Fuse also has hot reload live editing, well, not live editing, hot reload functionality. That is existent in all of the tools. However, Fuse initially they played around with the concept of inspector when you would open up another window where you can select an element in the preview, application preview, and then you can, for example, change font size and it would immediately adapt, and also change the value in the text editor. So that was the inspector. Now, I will tell more about that right away. Now, live preview on target devices. This is, I believe, also runs well for the others. You can actually just plug a phone, an Android, iOS phone into your computer, launch preview on the device, and actually as you are coding, you see every change on the device, and you can touch it, you can feel it, you can adjust everything. You do not need to work on desktop. You can work on the actual target devices, and that's a nice touch. Now, future Fuse. Recently, Fuse got a $12 million investment, and they have been spending that really well. They are currently, as we speak, working on the future Fuse, which will be the Fuse Pro. Pro obviously implies some price tag, which I imagine will not be that big, but it will bring a lot of things with it. Now, as I mentioned already, the UX markup editing functionality, you can start to imagine how you could, add animations in a visual editor like Sketch or Photoshop. Now imagine building applications that way. I am definitely looking forward to that day when Fuse Pro will make its debut to the world. And that's about future Fuse. Now, at the end of this presentation, I would like to actually leave you with this quote from Remy, who is the Vice President of Products at Fuse. It's somewhat lengthy, but it's sort of once again tells the story behind philosophy of Fuse. While React Native and NativeScript exist to let JavaScript developers write apps using native UIs, which is a great thing in itself, Fuse is about providing much better overall workflows for both designers and developers, with a very strong focus on user experience and front end. So that basically summarizes all I said. It's a strong statement, but I believe that Fuse is working well towards it, and they are, well, pretty close to reaching that statement. I'm done. So excited. So I guess since time allows, then we will now actually to code something in Fuse. I will not be running live previews on my devices here today because that relies on being in a stable Wi-Fi network, and I'm not on a Wi-Fi network right now, so I will just use my local preview. But you are actually welcome to download Fuse at any time, and you can try it out just like that. And now we switch to my sublime. Now here I am actually on a QA release of Fuse. It's quality assurance. It's sort of a pre-release version, so you can expect it to crash. I'm testing things out for Fuse, just like a lot of other guys. So don't blame me for that, but I will do my best for it not to crash. Now, I do have in mind something that I would like to build, and I have prepared already some sort of a basics for the project, but not much. Now, as you already saw in my example there, it starts with an empty app tag at the beginning, at the end, right? We also have a project file which specifies some dependencies, so you wouldn't have to specify them in JavaScript later. And then we have some assets, some pictures that I added there before. Now, a good point I think would be if I started with text and wrote hello world, so that you know that when I save this, it actually shows this hello world. So it's not just a snippet that I put in my presentation. That's the actual thing, right? So this is your hello world application. Done. Now, that is obviously not what we are going to build today. What we are going to build today is going to be a bit more sophisticated. So bear with me, this is going to get somewhat fast, I hope. So I will start with a dock panel, close it. At the top of the dock panel, I will dock a panel which is 56 points high. And its color will be this fantastic 185 color. and I save it, and it appears, right? So that's our panel docked at the top. Now let's dock one at the bottom. Panel dock equals bottom. Height will be the same, 56. Color will be different this time, so 1F8 maybe. I like those numbers a lot. Right, there it is. And now for the remaining space, it will be just a panel. I will fill it for now with a, or no, I will not fill it. I will just set the color on the panel, and the color will be 8F1. Yeah, no, not that one. 81F. No, not that one. 8F. No, that's the same. 8F1 maybe. No. Right, this one. I wanted this one, so you know there's more contrast. Now you see it's kind of nice that you can prototype so fast, and I'm for now just prototyping. However, I could get this application as it is now running on my phone, and it would be a proper application, right? So I'm not just prototyping. So that's the main thing you have to understand about Fuse. I will make this a bit smaller if you don't mind. Can you still read it? Yeah. Okay, awesome. Now, what I would like to do is in this panel, now let's start at the title bar at the top. This will be our title bar. In this one, I will put a text element, the value of which will be MDL. Which one do we have? Number 9? Right. Now that alone does not look too good, right? So first we have to make it white, then we have to increase the font size to 22, then we have to make it bold. Now that's too much, let's make it medium. Yeah, that looks about right. And I would want to also add another text element, so I will just copy paste this one. Font for this one will be, well, let's start with the value. It is cross-platfom, right? So color still white, font size 22, but this will be, we had regular and we also have light, I think. Now the problem, you can see they are rendered one behind each other, so we have to solve that. Let's put them in a stack panel with orientation horizontal. Stack panel stacks things, if you were wondering. It kind of makes sense. And when we do that, they actually are stacked. They are a bit too close together, so I will add some item spacing. Let's add 8. That looks about right. And now that also should be in the middle. So we will align this stack panel to the center. And now that looks like a proper title bar to me. Now as for the dock panel at the bottom bar, that could be some sort of a navigation, right? Navigation bar for the application. So let's add some spacing here and there so we see which is what. Now this is our bottom bar. Here I would actually want to put a grid. Grid, as you know, is flexible, right? From all the web development and everything, grids always take up full width, and then you can play around with stuff inside. So the same applies to Fuse. You can create fully liquid, flexible layouts that adapt to different screen heights, screen sizes. So this grid will have column count of 4. And that means that I have to supply 4 elements to it. Now you don't see much about that right now, but that's because we are actually going to create our first component, our first template. I don't want to create 4 different buttons if I can just create one. That kind of makes sense, right? Now here at the top I can go ahead and say panel UX class, which is the Fuse equivalent for a template. It will not be rendered on screen where it is in place, but only when I use it. So UX class will be menu item. It makes sense to me. Now this one should accept a label as a property, so when I use it I can tell what's the label for that menu item is. So I tell it's a string, UX property equals label, and then inside of the component text value I have to refer to the property, so I write read property because I don't need to write it, I only need to read it, read property label. And for now without any styling, right? So that's our menu item. Now here where I have those panels, I can actually replace those with menu items. Now menu item obviously expects this label. So I write label equals F. Label equals, guess the next letter. Obviously. I hope it didn't hang. Now these are the crashes that I'm referring to when I'm speaking about QA versions of Fuse. So I will have to quickly restart Fuse. Don't ever install QA versions if you are going to a presentation. MDL 9, so let's just start up the project once again. Compact view. Now you can also see it doesn't take that much time to recover from a complete crash where the application froze, and I can assure you that this also is being worked on. I have seen the internal issue lists and how fast guys are on resolving things. Now here we are back, and here we actually have our 4 menu items, F, U, S, E. Now again, they don't look too good, so each of them are obviously living in its own cell grid, so that's why they are spaced out evenly, right? But all of the text elements are aligned to the top left corner of that particular element they are in. Now instead I would want to align them to center. That's already better. Now again, just as with those titles above, we can set the color to white probably, or actually no. I think a better color would be black, but not just black. I will put a font equals bold to make it ugly. I will make the font size 24 to make it even more ugly, and then I will fix it by adding an alpha channel to the black color. So maybe something about A. No, that's too much. No, this is a bit better, right? So all I did was I actually made the letters a bit transparent. I added some transparency on the color itself that gets applied to the text. So it's actually as simple as that. I don't have to change opacity on the menu item itself, although I could. I change it only on the text. Now 6 is maybe too low. Let's go for 8. That looks good to me. Now those of course would be icons in actual application. For now I don't have those icons at hand, so I'm simply using these letters here. Now the app doesn't do much, right? Now the content area, let's see what we can do about that. Now as you remember, this panel, that's the orange one, in that one I would want to put a scroll view so that you can scroll stuff inside of it. Let's just make a simple list. Scroll view. An empty scroll view does not do much again, so inside of that I will add a stack panel once again, but this time it will be vertical stack panel, not the horizontal one as we have in the title, because we would be stacking items vertically. And inside of this stack panel I will write the following, and now this will be the part where we actually get to some JavaScript, simply because I'm too lazy to write too much UX code. Now it will be each items, and I will be data binding to tools variable. We close the each, and we will create also a new UX class, which will be tool item. Now, so that we don't get errors, I will first start with panel UX class. It was tool item, I think, right? So that there's simply the definition for it, because I'm already using. And now I can actually save and nothing changes and nothing breaks, and that's perfectly fine. Now, as for the tools themselves, every file in Fuse, every component in Fuse, every UX file can have a JavaScript file attached to it. Now again, since I'm lazy, I will actually write the JavaScript in line, but you could have it in a separate file, and that's what you would usually do if you were writing an actual useful application. So for an external file, the syntax would be JavaScript file, some file.js if it resides in the root. Now I won't do that, I'm just writing JavaScript block here, and I will start with var. It's going to be tools. It will be a simple array, and then in module exports, because I have to make it available to UX, because they are running on separate threads, right? So this is basically the bridge between the JavaScript and UX world that you currently see. And tools is tools. Now when I save that, again nothing changes because the tools array is empty. And again, since I'm lazy, then I will open my assets folder where I have this array already filled with something, and I will put that inside of that array. Now this is an array of objects, as you can see, right? And each object contains two properties. One is title, the other is icon. I do have those icons right here in the assets folder, right? And then we have the titles. So that's no magic that I did with the copy paste here. Now when I save that, again nothing happens. That's because our tool item UX class does not show anything. So we have to take care about that. Inside of the UX class, I will put a rectangle. I will make it white, and I will set a bit of a corner radius to it, so it gets those nice rounded material style corners of 2 pixel radius. Now again, nothing changes because the height of this item is 0. So let's add some height to the template, which will be, well, let's go for 56 again. And now actually we do see a blank box there, but I assure you that is not a single box, it's actually 8 of them, I think. Now to see that, let's add some item spacing to the vertical stack panel. Let's make it 2. And now you can actually see that those are those items. And if you remember, we put them in a scroll view, which means that I can do this on it immediately right away. Right? So that's about it. Now what about the properties, the title and the icon? We should somehow show them. Again, when we are using this specific UX class inside of this each, it gets the data context of that array, or the specific item it iterates through, which means that inside of this template I can directly refer to those properties inside of those objects, which is cool. Now I think it's gonna be a grid. And that grid will, this time I will not go with column count, but I will go with columns, and I will say that the first column is 1 star, while the second is, I don't know, maybe 5 star. What that means is there's a little bit of mathematics involved. The total with the 100 of the grid will be 6 stars. Yes, exactly. So basically the first cell will be 1 and the other will be 5. So in total it's 6. So that's the thinking. And here in the first cell I will be putting an image, file equals icon, because that's how this property is called. And as the second I will put text value equals title. Now when I save this, something should happen. Something does happen, yes, something does happen. Now you actually see immediately, right as I saved, we get the icons and the titles inside of those elements, just as they were in JavaScript here. Now again, that does not look too pretty, so we have to fix that. Now for the image, it's actually quite simple. I think we can add a bit of a margin to it, say 8 points maybe. Yeah, it's already better. For the cells, I think we need some cell spacing, maybe 8 again. And the text should be aligned to vertical center. I would like it to still be at the left side, but centered vertically. And font size should be probably 18. Yeah, and I think that might be it for now for these icons. Well, I don't know, maybe they should not be touching the sides because we don't see those nice rounded corners, right? So here where we actually have the items, we can move this stack panel away from sides by adding a bit of a margin to it. Now again, you don't see much of those rounded corners, I think, but just to prove that they are there, I can make this corner radius 20. So here they are. That is ugly, so I'm reverting to 2. And here you already have a MDL number 9 cross-platform application showing all the possible tools that I was showing on the second slide of my presentation, along with their names. Now I think that's already pretty nice. One thing that I think I mentioned in the presentation but you have not yet seen is user interaction. The only one for now is this scroll view scrolling, which is kind of basic. Now I would like to show you a bit more of that. So we have this tool item thing here. I will add a sort of interaction to it so you actually get some sort of a feel to the application. So I will write while pressed. So this trigger becomes true when I tap and hold an item. So while pressed, I will say change. Now I will need to change something. The question is, what could I change? And I think I will be wanting to change this color. So to be able to do that, I actually have to give this rectangle a UX name so I can refer to it by something, because otherwise it's just some random rectangle. The background. And then I change the background dot color to, I think we can simply animate the opacity of it, but I still would be changing the opacity on the color. So it will be FFF, say maybe 8 again. Duration for that change will be 0.4. And I think without an easing should be fine. Now I save this, and now when I press and hold the item, you can actually see that the background rectangle becomes slightly transparent as long as I hold it. And if I simply tap it, then it just starts the animation and animates right back because it's while pressed. So when I keep it pressed for as long as 0.4 seconds, it animates fully. When I release it, it animates back. So you don't have to think about animating things back from the rest state. You have already specified what the animation is forwards, and then it animates back. You can also specify backwards animation if you want to, but you are not, required to. So that's how Fuse makes it easy for you. And also this while pressed, the item is still pressed also while I'm dragging, and it's immediately each of them. Now another nice thing about Fuse is that you can apply different runtime effects on things, which is not necessarily always nice, but sometimes it just makes sense. It does not make much sense in this case, but just to show how that works. Now, where do we have this top panel? I would want to add a shadow to it, so I write shadow. And there you can see, if I scroll this one up, there is a bit of a shadow there, right? Now it's not that visible up there, so we will add another shadow on the bottom bar, but that shadow will have to shine upwards, which is again completely wrong, but still just for the sake of it. So again, here we write shadow, but in this case the angle of it will be minus 90 degrees. And when I save that, you can see at the bottom there, there's also a shadow. Now when I pull this down, you can see it's there and everything else is behind it. Now there's obviously a simple layering mechanism to this, and the layering mechanism works on specific UX levels. Every item that is on top in UX is also on top visually, just in as in Photoshop layers. So, and actually that's it for my live coding session too.